I am Dr. Kaelen Vance. I spent 15 years of my life fighting a force of nature called van der Waals attraction. It is the force that makes graphene sheets, the strongest material on Earth, want to snap together and turn back into useless graphite. I solved it. I created a spacer molecule, a microscopic chemical wedge that keeps the sheets apart so they can hold a massive electrical charge. It was the breakthrough that made the 5-minute electric vehicle charger possible. But my brother, Julian, didn't like the spacer. He said the additive made the battery fluid look cloudy. He said it ruined the aesthetic of his pure energy marketing campaign. So, when he orchestrated a hostile takeover of my company and fired me, the first thing he did was remove the spacer to make the chemistry clean. He just shipped 50,000 electric hypercars to customers. They are fast. They are beautiful. And they work perfectly. Exactly one time. Julian thinks he revolutionized the auto industry. He actually just manufactured the world's most expensive pencils. And the erasers are coming off. Carbon is the most promiscuous element in the periodic table. It will bond with almost anything, including itself. It is the backbone of life, the diamond on a wedding ring, and the charcoal in a grill. It is everything and nothing, depending on how you arrange the atoms. If you arrange carbon atoms in a chaotic, jumbled mess, you get soot. If you crush them under the weight of a continent for a billion years, you get a diamond. But if you arrange them in a perfect, single layer of hexagonal honeycombs, you get graphene. Graphene is the celebrity of materials science. It is 1 atom thick. It is 200 times stronger than steel. It conducts electricity faster than copper. On paper, it is a miracle. But in the real world, graphene has a curse. It suffers from a fatal attraction known as the van der Waals force. It is a weak force, a ghostly whisper of quantum electrodynamics that exists between molecules. Alone, it is nothing. But spread across the massive surface area of a graphene sheet, it becomes an irresistible gravity. Graphene sheets want to stack. They crave it. They will pull themselves together with a violence that is terrifying to behold under a microscope. And the moment they touch, the moment they align, the magic dies. They cease to be the miracle material. They become graphite. Common, brittle, useless graphite. The stuff inside a number 2 pencil. My name is Dr. Kaelen Vance, and I have spent the last 15 years of my life fighting this force. I am a materials scientist, a battery chemist, and currently, the only man in the world staring at a beaker of gray sludge that holds the secret to the energy transition. The lab was quiet, save for the rhythmic thrum hiss of the argon scrubbers. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. The facility, Aion Energy, was located in an industrial park in Nevada, a windowless box of concrete and steel designed to keep secrets in and dust out. I sat in front of the glove box, a sealed glass chamber filled with inert gas, my hands encased in thick black rubber gloves that extended into the box. Inside, a small pouch cell sat on a testing rig. It looked unimpressive. It looked like a silver Pop-Tart wrapper with 2 copper tabs sticking out. But the chemistry inside was my life's work. Cycle 4000, I whispered into the dictaphone sitting on the desk. Capacity fade, negligible. Internal resistance, stable at 0.05 milliohms. I pulled my hands out of the gloves with a wet thwack. My shirt was stuck to my back. The HVAC system was set to 68 degrees, but I was sweating. I walked over to the mixing station. On the magnetic stirrer sat a 2-liter beaker of electrolyte. This was the problem. This was the solution. Standard lithium-ion electrolyte is a clear, pristine liquid. It looks like water or high-grade vodka. It represents purity. My electrolyte looked like dirty dishwater. It was a murky, opaque, swirling suspension of gray particulate matter. If you held it up to the light, you couldn't see through it. It looked wrong. I picked up the bottle of white powder sitting next to the beaker. The label read, beta-cyclodextrin. It is a cyclic oligosaccharide. A sugar molecule shaped like a donut. In the pharmaceutical industry, they use it to deliver drugs into the bloodstream. In the food industry, they use it to trap odors in Febreze. But here, I was using it as a doorstop. I had discovered that if you injected high concentrations of these microscopic donuts into the graphene slurry, they would intercalate between the carbon sheets. They acted as spacer molecules. They were molecular pillars that held the ceiling up, preventing the graphene sheets from collapsing onto the floor. They kept the van der Waals forces at bay. They kept the gallery open so the lithium ions could rush in and out at blinding speed. It's ugly, a voice said from the doorway. But does it work? I didn't turn around. I knew the voice. It was Julian, my older brother. The CEO of Aion Energy. It works, Julian, I said, watching the gray vortex spin in the beaker. We just cleared 4,000 fast charge cycles. That's equivalent to 10 years of driving. The degradation is less than 2%. Julian walked into the lab. He was the visual opposite of everything in this room. Where the lab was sterile, chaotic, and functional, Julian was polished, tailored, and expensive. He wore a midnight blue suit that probably cost more than the mass spectrometer in the corner. He smelled of sandalwood and ambition. He walked up to the bench and peered at the beaker with a grimace. It looks like cement mix, he said. It's a functional colloid, I corrected. The turbidity comes from the refraction index of the cyclodextrin clusters. They scatter light. Turbidity, Julian repeated the word like it was a disease. Kaelen, we have the IPO roadshow next week. I have to stand on a stage in New York and hold up a vial of our miracle liquid. I can't hold up this. It looks like sludge. It looks impure. The purity is in the performance, I said, turning to face him. This sludge allows us to charge a vehicle in 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Julian. That's the same time it takes to pump gas. It kills the internal combustion engine. Who cares what the liquid looks like? It's sealed inside a battery casing. Julian picked up a glass vial of the mixture. He swirled it. The gray particles danced in the light. Investors care, he said softly. Perception is reality, Kaelen. We are pitching the future of energy. The future is supposed to be clean. It's supposed to be bright. Solid-state batteries are the hype right now because they sound solid. Secure. This looks like something leaking out of a tailpipe. Solid-state batteries are brittle, I countered. They crack. They delaminate. This is a semi-liquid supercapacitor hybrid. It heals itself. It breathes. It's cloudy, Julian insisted. Can we filter it? If you filter it, you remove the spacer, I said, my patience fraying. If you remove the spacer, the sheets restack. If they restack, the surface area collapses. You lose the capacitance. You lose the speed. You lose everything. Julian set the vial down. He looked at the battery testing rig. The monitor showed a vertical green line, the charging curve. It was nearly straight up. 5 minutes, Julian muttered. You're sure? Watch, I said. I moved to the high-voltage test bench. I connected a fresh pouch cell to the charging leads. The cables were as thick as my thumb, liquid-cooled to handle the massive amperage. Initiating fast charge, I said. 350 kilowatts. I hit the button. Usually, when you charge a battery this fast, you hear things. You hear the electrolyte boiling. You hear the anode swelling. It's a violent process. But the room remained silent. The only sound was the hum of the cooling pump. On the screen, the voltage numbers blurred, they were climbing so fast. 10%. 30%. 60%. 80%. Time? Julian asked. 3 minutes and 42 seconds, I said. The cycle finished. 100% charged. Total time, 4 minutes, 50 seconds. I disconnected the cell. It was warm to the touch, but not hot. Here, I said, tossing the cell to Julian. He caught it. He looked at it with a mixture of awe and greed. It feels light, he said. Graphene is mostly nothing, I said, its surface area. That pouch holds enough energy to drive a Tesla 40 miles. And we can stack 2,000 of them into a skateboard chassis. Julian ran his thumb over the silver foil. I could see the gears turning in his head. He wasn't thinking about the ions. He wasn't thinking about the spacer molecule holding the atomic layers apart like Atlas holding up the sky. He was calculating the valuation. We can sell this, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We can sell this for billions. We can build it, I corrected. We aren't selling the company, Julian. We're building the factory. We're going to make the cells here. Julian looked at me. There was a strange glint in his eye, a flatness that I hadn't seen before. The factory is expensive, Kaelen. The capital expenditure for the mixing equipment alone. Especially for this specific recipe. The injectors clog. The pumps were out because of the particulate matter. That's the cost of doing business, I said. It's a difficult material. That's why no one else has done it. Efficiency, Julian said, more to himself than to me. The market rewards efficiency. If we could just streamline the chemistry. Make it cleaner. Make it flow better. You can't streamline physics, I snapped. The chemistry is the chemistry. You change one variable, and the whole system fails. Maybe, Julian said. He placed the cell back on the bench. Or maybe you're just too close to it. You've been staring at these molecules for 15 years, Kaelen. You see the trees, but you're missing the forest. The forest is made of trees, Julian. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was his boardroom smile. The one he used right before he raised the price on a contract. Get some sleep, Kaelen, he said. You look terrible. We have the board meeting on Thursday. The final go/no-go for the IPO. I'll be there, I said. I'm the CTO. I have to present the technology. Right, Julian said. The presentation. He turned and walked out of the lab. I stayed behind. I looked at the beaker of gray sludge swirling on the magnetic plate. It was ugly. It was murky. It looked like industrial waste. But to me, it was beautiful. It was the only honest thing in the building. It didn't pretend to be pure. It didn't pretend to be simple. It was messy, complicated, and robust. I picked up a pipette and drew a sample. Under the microscope, the graphene sheets looked like crumpled silk sheets, suspended in a chaotic dance, kept eternally apart by the tiny, invisible donuts of cyclodextrin. Don't let them touch, I thought. Whatever you do, don't let them touch. I didn't know it then, but Julian was already thinking about how to clean up the mess. He was already thinking about how to filter the solution. He was already thinking about purity. And in the world of high-stakes technology, the pursuit of purity is often the fastest path to corruption. The boardroom of Aion Energy was located on the top floor, a glass aquarium suspended 40 stories above the Nevada desert. The view was spectacular, miles of red rock and scrub brush stretching out to the horizon, shimmering in the heat haze. Inside, however, the air was refrigerated to a crisp 65 degrees. I walked in at 9 a.m. sharp. I was wearing my investor suit, a navy blazer that felt tight in the shoulders and a tie I hadn't worn since my PhD defense. I carried my laptop, which contained the slide deck for the IPO technical presentation. The room was already full. This was my first warning. Usually, for a technical review, people drift in late, grabbing coffee and bagels. But today, everyone was seated. The chatter stopped the moment I opened the door. At the head of the table sat Julian. He looked immaculate, as always. To his right was Marcus Vance, our father and the chairman of the board, a man who had made his money in real estate and viewed technology as just another form of plumbing. To Julian's left sat the venture capitalists from Sand Hill Road, venture partners who looked at spreadsheets, not molecules. Morning, I said, setting my laptop down on the mahogany table. I have the updated cycle life data. You're going to like the thermal curves. Nobody smiled. Nobody opened their notebooks. Sit down, Kaelen, my father said. His voice was gravelly, the tone he used when a contractor was over budget. I pulled out a chair. Is everything okay? Did the underwriters push back on the valuation? The valuation is strong, Julian said. He clasped his hands on the table. The market is hungry for this story. The infinity cell. It's a great narrative. It's not a narrative, I said, bristling slightly. It's physics. To you, it's physics, Julian corrected. To the market, it's a story about the end of fossil fuels. And for that story to sell, the company needs to look mature. I looked around the table. The VCs were studying their phones or staring out the window. They were avoiding eye contact. What are you saying? I asked. Julian sighed, a sound of practiced regret. Kaelen, we've been discussing the organizational chart for the public entity. Aion Energy is no longer a startup. We are about to be a manufacturing giant. We need to ship 50,000 units a quarter. That requires logistics, supply chain management, and ruthless efficiency. I know that, I said. That's why I hired the operations team. The operations team is frustrated. One of the VCs, a man named Sterling, spoke up. He was the new efficiency expert the board had brought in last month. They say you're constantly halting the production line to tweak the chemical ratios. They say you're rejecting batches that are within statistical tolerance because the turbidity isn't right. Because the turbidity determines the capacitance. I shot back. If the mix isn't right, the spacer precipitates. If the spacer precipitates, the battery is garbage. I'm not tweaking, I'm quality controlling. You're tinkering, Julian said firmly. You're acting like a scientist in a university lab, looking for the perfect reaction. But we aren't in a university anymore, Kaelen. We are a factory. Factories don't need perfect, they need consistent. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Consistent garbage is still garbage. We believe the technology is ready, Julian continued, ignoring my comment. The prototype works. The pilot line is running. But your insistence on bespoke chemistry is a bottleneck. The suspended particulate matter, this spacer, is clogging the high-speed injection nozzles. It's slowing down the cycle time by 40%. It's necessary, I insisted. It's the structural integrity of the cell. Is it? Julian asked. He leaned forward. Or is it just a crutch? A way to compensate for impurities in the raw graphene? Excuse me? Sterling has a background in chemical engineering, Julian said, nodding to the VC. He believes we can achieve similar energy densities with a purer, cleaner electrolyte mix, provided we use higher-grade precursor materials. We can filter out the sludge, run a cleaner line, and increase throughput. I looked at Sterling. The man was a spreadsheet jockey. He wouldn't know a covalent bond if it hit him in the face. You can't filter it, I said, my voice rising. If you filter out the cyclodextrin, you remove the interlayer spacing. The graphene sheets will restack due to van der Waals attraction. You'll create graphite. You'll build a brick. That is a theoretical risk, Sterling said dismissively. We can mitigate it with better lamination pressure. It's not a risk. I slammed my hand on the table. It's a law of nature. It's like saying gravity is a theoretical risk when you jump off a cliff. My father cleared his throat. Kaelen. Calm down. I won't calm down. You're talking about gutting the technology days before the launch. We are talking about optimizing the technology, Julian said. And unfortunately, your refusal to collaborate on these optimizations has made your position untenable. The word hung in the air. Untenable. We took a vote this morning, Julian said softly. He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. It was face down. I stared at it. You voted without me? It was an executive session, my father said. For the good of the company. I reached out and turned the paper over. Board Resolution 2024-09 Motion to Restructure Executive Leadership. Resolved, Kaelen Vance is removed from the position of Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately. Resolved, Julian Vance is appointed acting CTO in addition to CEO. Resolved, Kaelen Vance is offered the role of Founder Emeritus and Chief Science Advisor, non-voting. I read it twice. The words blurred. Founder Emeritus, I said, tasting the bile in my throat. That's a retirement home title. It comes with a generous stipend, Julian said. And you keep your equity. You'll be a billionaire when the bell rings on Wall Street next week. All you have to do is step back. Let us handle the manufacturing. Let us scale it. You're stealing it, I whispered. I built this. I slept on the floor of the lab for 5 years. I hold the patents. The company holds the patents, Julian corrected. You assigned them to Aion Energy when we incorporated. Remember? I looked at my father. Dad? You're letting him do this? My father looked at his hands. It's business, son. Julian knows how to run a company. You're a dreamer. Dreamers get eaten alive in this industry. Take the money. Go build another lab. Invent something else. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. You think you can run the line without me? I asked Julian. You think you can just turn the knobs and make batteries? It's a recipe, Kaelen, Julian said, leaning back in his chair. We have the documentation. We have the SOPs. We don't need a wizard to stir the pot anymore. We need a chef. It's not a recipe, I said, leaning over the table, staring directly into his eyes. It's a balance. It's a chaotic system. If you remove the spacer, if you try to make it pure just to satisfy your obsession with aesthetics, the batteries will fail. They won't fail immediately. They'll fail after the first cycle. They'll be Trojan horses. We'll take that under advisement, Sterling said dryly. Julian pressed a button on the intercom. Security, could you please escort Mr. Vance to the exit? The door opened. 2 large men in gray uniforms stepped in. They looked uncomfortable. They knew me. I'd bought them donuts on the night shifts. I'm leaving, I said to the guards. Don't touch me. I grabbed my laptop. Leave the laptop, Kaelen, Julian said. Company property. Data security protocols. I froze. My notes. My simulation data. The evidence of why the spacer was critical. It has my personal files, I said. We'll have IT scrub it and send you the personal data, Julian said. Hand it over. I looked at the laptop. Then I looked at Julian. I realized then that this wasn't just about efficiency. This was about erasure. He wanted to be the genius. He wanted to be the one who saved the world. And to do that, he had to erase the brother who actually did the work. I placed the laptop on the table. Fine, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my security badge. I dropped it on top of the resolution paper. You want to be the CTO, Julian? I asked. Congratulations. You just inherited a bomb. You're being dramatic, Julian said, picking up his pen to sign the meeting minutes. Am I? I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at the room of suits, men who thought that money could negotiate with chemistry. Carbon doesn't care about your stock price, I said. And Waals doesn't care about your marketing strategy. When those sheets zipper shut, remember this moment. Remember that you chose to make it pretty instead of making it work. Goodbye, Kaelen, Julian said, not looking up. I walked out into the hallway. The security guards flanked me. Sorry, Dr. Vance, one of them whispered. It's okay, Mike, I said. Just don't buy the car. Okay? Whatever you do, don't buy the car. We walked to the elevator. The door slid shut, cutting off the view of the boardroom. I descended 40 floors in silence. When I walked out into the blinding Nevada sun, the heat hit me like a physical blow. I walked to my beat-up sedan in the parking lot. I looked back at the gleaming glass tower of Aion Energy. I was rich, on paper. In a week, I would be worth billions, but as I started my car and drove away, I didn't feel rich. I felt the heavy, sinking dread of a man who knows that a train has just left the station with no brakes, and his own family is driving it. I drove home. I went into my garage. I pulled out my old whiteboard, the one I used before the VC money, before the glass tower. I picked up a marker. I wrote one word in the center of the board, graphite. Then I sat down and waited for the crash. The Aion Energy Gigafactory was a cavernous beast of a building, stretching for half a mile across the Nevada desert floor. Inside, it was a cathedral of automation. Robotic arms moved with insect-like precision, welding aluminum casings. Automated guided vehicles hummed along magnetic tracks, carrying trays of raw materials. It was loud, rhythmic, and imposing. Julian Vance walked the catwalk suspended above the production floor, looking down at his kingdom. He wore a hard hat that had been custom painted a matte midnight blue to match his suit. Beside him walked Sterling, the new VP of manufacturing, and a small entourage of junior engineers who carried clipboards and looked terrified. The throughput on line 3 is down again, Sterling shouted over the din of the machines. He pointed to a section of the line where red warning lights were flashing. Why? Julian asked, his voice tight. We have the launch in 10 days. We need inventory. It's the injection nozzles, Sterling said. They're clogged. Again. Julian stopped walking. He gripped the railing. Clogged with what? The slurry, Sterling said. The electrolyte mix. It's too viscous. The particulate matter, the spacer that Kaelen insisted on, it settles in the feed lines. It turns into a paste if the flow rate drops even slightly. Julian looked down at the mixing station. Huge stainless steel vats were churning the gray, murky liquid. It looked completely out of place in his pristine, white factory. It looked like someone was mixing concrete in a surgical suite. Show me, Julian said. They descended the metal stairs to the factory floor. The air grew warmer and smelled of solvents. They approached the nozzle maintenance station. A technician was dismantling a high-speed injector. He pulled out the needle, a precision machine piece of steel worth $5,000. The tip was caked in a gray, gritty substance. See that? Sterling said, pointing at the gunk. That's the cyclodextrin. It's abrasive. It wears out the seals and blocks the aperture. We have to stop the line every 4 hours to flush the system. That's 20% downtime, Julian. 20%. Julian stared at the gray gunk. He felt a surge of irrational anger. It was Kaelen's mess. Even gone, his brother was still haunting the machinery, gumming up the works with his obsession for molecular architecture. Can we grind it finer? Julian asked. Make the particles smaller? We tried, one of the junior engineers spoke up. But the cyclodextrin molecules tend to agglomerate. They clump together. It's their nature. They are sticky. Julian looked at the massive vats of gray sludge. It's ugly, Julian muttered. It's inefficient. And it's costing us millions in downtime. He turned to Sterling. You said yesterday that we could run it without the additive. You said the density would go up. Sterling nodded enthusiastically. He pulled a tablet from his pocket and brought up a chart. Look at this simulation, Sterling said. The blue bar is Kaelen's formula. The gray area represents the volume taken up by the spacer molecule. It's inert volume, sir. It doesn't store energy. It just takes up space. Right, Julian said. That's why he called it a spacer. But if we remove it, Sterling swiped to the next slide, we replace that dead volume with active electrolyte. More lithium ions. The energy density jumps from 400 watt-hours per kilogram to 460. 460, Julian repeated. The number was intoxicating. It wasn't just an improvement, it was a generational leap. It would make Aion Energy untouchable. And the flow rate? Julian asked. Liquid perfection, Sterling said. Without the particulate, the electrolyte flows like water. No clogs. No downtime. We could run the lines at 100% speed. We could hit the launch targets with a week to spare. But the restacking issue, Julian said, reciting the warning Kaelen had shouted in the boardroom. Kaelen said the graphene sheets would collapse without the spacer. Sterling scoffed. Theoretical fear-mongering. Look, graphene is rigid. It's carbon. It's diamond hard. Kaelen treated it like it was wet tissue paper. He was over-engineering for a problem that exists in a university beaker, not in a compressed, laminated cell. So you're saying the cell structure holds itself up? I'm saying the lamination pressure keeps the layers aligned, Sterling said. And once the lithium ions rush in during the first charge, they act as the support. The ions themselves are the spacers. It sounded plausible. It sounded scientific. And most importantly, it sounded profitable. Julian looked at the clogged nozzle. He looked at the ugly gray vats. Then he looked at the clean, futuristic rendering of the battery on the wall poster. Clean it up, Julian said. Sir, initiate the clarity protocol, Julian ordered. Flush the tanks. Remove the cyclodextrin from the bill of materials. I want clear, pure electrolyte running through those lines by the end of the shift. The junior engineer looked nervous. Sir, shouldn't we run a life cycle test first? A 500 cycle degradation study? We don't have time for 500 cycles, Julian snapped. That takes 3 months. We have the launch in 10 days. Run a functional test. Charge it. Discharge it. If it holds the capacity, ship it. But. Do it, Sterling cut in, sensing the CEO's mood. You heard the man. Drain the tanks. 3 hours later, the factory floor was a hive of activity. The maintenance crews had flushed the lines. The gray sludge was pumped out into waste drums and hauled away. In its place, fresh tankers arrived. They pumped in gallons of pristine, pharmaceutical-grade solvent and lithium salts. Julian stood by the observation window of the mixing room. He watched as the new mixture swirled in the vats. It was crystal clear. It caught the light of the overhead LEDs and sparkled. It looked like pure energy. Beautiful, Julian whispered. Line 3 is restarted, Sterling reported over the radio. Flow rate is 100%. No blockages. Injection pressure is stable. Production speed? We are running at maximum capacity, sir. We're printing batteries. Julian smiled. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Kaelen had been the clog. Kaelen and his messy, paranoid chemistry. He walked down to the quality assurance station at the end of the line. A robotic arm placed a freshly made battery cell onto the conveyor belt. It was warm. The testing technician picked it up. He clamped it into the rig. First charge test, the technician announced. Julian held his breath. The voltage ramped up. The green line on the monitor shot vertical. Charge complete. Capacity, 115% of target. It works, the technician said, eyes wide. Sir, the capacity. It's higher than the spec. It's holding 465 watt-hours. Of course it is, Julian said, buttoning his jacket. We got rid of the dead weight. He picked up the cell. It felt dense. Powerful. What about the restacking? Julian asked, almost mockingly. Any sign of collapse? Internal resistance is lower than ever, the technician said. The ions are moving freely. It's the most efficient cell we've ever built. Julian nodded. He felt vindicated. Kaelen was a brilliant scientist, perhaps, but he was a coward. He was afraid of his own creation. He had hobbled the battery with spacers because he didn't trust the strength of the material. Ship it, Julian said. Pack them into the skateboards. Install them in the cars. We have a revolution to deliver. That night, the factory hummed with a new, higher pitch. The friction was gone. The impurity had been excised. Thousands of battery cells rolled off the line. They were filled with the clear, pure liquid. Inside each cell, billions of sheets of graphene were floating in the solvent. When the cells were charged for the first time at the end of the line, the lithium ions rushed in. They forced their way between the graphene sheets, pushing them apart, storing energy. The battery swelled slightly, taut with power. It was a perfect mechanism. But physics is a patient executioner. Julian didn't understand that the lithium ions were temporary guests. They were renters. Eventually, the customer would drive the car. They would hit the accelerator. The ions would leave the battery to power the motor. And when the ions left, the apartment would be empty. Without the ugly spacer molecules to hold the walls up, the graphene sheets would look at each other across the void. The van der Waals force, the ancient, irresistible attraction of carbon to carbon, would wake up. The walls wouldn't just close. They would fuse. But for now, under the bright lights of the gigafactory, everything looked clear. Everything looked pure. And the stock price in the after-hours market was ticking up, oblivious to the fact that Aion Energy was currently manufacturing thousands of beautiful, high-tech bricks. Julian walked out to his car, feeling like a god. He checked his phone. A text from Sterling. Production record broken. No clogs. We are geniuses. Julian typed back, purity wins. He drove home, leaving the factory running at full speed, filling the world with a mistake that couldn't be undone. Silence is heavy. In the lab, silence usually meant something had broken, a pump had seized, a stirrer had died. But in my house, silence just meant I was unemployed. It had been 10 days since the coup. 10 days since I was escorted out of the building I designed, leaving behind my badge and my life's work. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the detritus of a man who suddenly has nowhere to go. Half-finished cups of coffee, stacks of scientific journals, and a laptop that wasn't the secure company machine, but a personal MacBook I used for reading news. On the screen, CNBC was broadcasting live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The banner at the bottom of the screen screamed in green pixels. Aion Energy IPO, the biggest tech listing since Facebook. The talking heads were ecstatic. It's not just a car company, the analyst with the slicked back hair was shouting. It's an energy storage revolution. They claim 460 watt-hours per kilogram. That's 20% higher than the theoretical limit of current solid-state tech. If these numbers hold up, Aion isn't just killing the gas engine, they're killing the grid. I leaned forward. 460 watt-hours per kilogram. The number flashed on the screen again. It hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I felt the air leave my lungs. That's impossible, I whispered to the empty room. I grabbed a notebook from the coffee table. I clicked a pen. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the terrifying clarity of the math. I scribbled a formula for the specific capacity of graphene. Theoretical max with intercalation, 744 mAh/G. Voltage plateau, 2.2 volts. Volumetric efficiency loss due to spacer molecule, 15%. My formula, the safe formula, the one with the ugly gray sludge, topped out at 400 watt-hours/kg. That was the ceiling. The laws of physics didn't allow for more because the cyclodextrin spacer took up physical volume. It was dead weight that didn't store energy, but it was the structural skeleton that kept the house standing. To get to 460, you would have to remove the skeleton. You would have to replace the dead volume with active lithium. He did it, I said, dropping the pen. The idiot actually did it. He removed the spacer. I stood up and paced the room. My mind raced through the implications. I visualized the molecular structure inside the cells rolling off the line right now. Without the spacer, the graphene sheets were perfectly flat, perfectly parallel. The Virgin cycle. That's what we call the first time a battery is charged. It's the moment of birth. In the factory, right now, Julian's machines were injecting the pure electrolyte. It was clear. It flowed easily. Then, they connected the charging cables. They pushed 350 kilowatts of power into the cell. I closed my eyes and watched it happen in my mind's eye. Billions of lithium ions, tiny, positively charged spheres, rushing from the cathode to the anode. They are desperate to find a home. They force their way between the graphene sheets. Push. Expand. The pressure of the ions wedges the graphene layers apart. The battery swells with energy. The voltage rises. The capacity looks incredible because there is no spacer taking up room. Every angstrom of space is filled with fuel. It works. To the quality control sensors, to the software, to Julian. It looks like a miracle. It looks like a battery that holds more energy than anything ever built. But it's a trap. Because a battery isn't a storage tank. It's a lung. It breathes in, and it breathes out. Charging is inhaling. Discharging is exhaling. When the customer buys the car, the battery is full. The lung is inflated. The lithium ions are holding the walls up. But then, the customer drives. They step on the accelerator. The motor draws current. The lithium ions leave the anode. They rush back to the cathode. And as they leave, the space between the graphene sheets empties. In my design, the cyclodextrin rings would be there. Tiny, rigid donuts acting as pillars, keeping the gap open, waiting for the ions to return. In Julian's design? There is nothing. Just empty space. 2 sheets of carbon, separated by a vacuum. And carbon hates a vacuum. The van der Waals force, the intermolecular gravity that holds the graphite in your pencil together, would wake up. It is a short-range force, but it is relentless. As the gap shrinks below 0.335 nanometers, the force becomes infinite. Snap. The sheets will pull together. They will align perfectly. The lung will collapse. The graphene will turn into graphite. And graphite doesn't breathe. You can't pump air into a block of concrete. It's a primary cell, I realized, feeling sick. He built a single-use battery for a $100,000 car. I ran to my computer. I had to be sure, I still had a backdoor access to the raw materials inventory log. It wasn't a hack, exactly, just a read-only API key I had set up on my personal dashboard years ago to track supply chain bottlenecks. IT had revoked my email, but they hadn't scrubbed the API tokens. I logged in. The dashboard loaded, flickering with real-time data from the Nevada Gigafactory. Inventory status lithium salts, okay. Solvent, okay. Graphene precursor, okay. I scrolled down to additives. Beta cyclodextrin, 0 kg. Last order, cancelled. There it was. The smoking gun. 0 kilograms. They weren't putting a single gram of the spacer into the mix. I looked at the production counter. Units produced this week, 12,400. 12,000 cars. 12,000 time bombs. Not explosive bombs, graphite is stable. But financial bombs. Kinetic bricks. I picked up my phone. I dialed Sterling's number. I knew he wouldn't answer, but I had to try. Ring. 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 The person you are trying to reach is unavailable. I dialed the main switchboard. Aion Energy, how may I direct your call? This is Kaelen Vance. Connect me to the engineering floor. Connect me to Davis in quality assurance. One moment, please. Silence. Then. I'm sorry, Mr. Vance. I've been instructed not to put your calls through. Listen to me. I shouted into the phone. You have a catastrophic failure mode in the battery chemistry. You cannot ship those cars. The cells will collapse on the first discharge cycle. Sir, please don't yell. Security has been notified of your call. Click. I threw the phone onto the couch. It was useless. They were in the reality distortion field. They were high on their own supply. They looked at the green line on the charging graph and saw infinite money. They didn't understand that the line goes down, too. I sat back down at the computer. The CNBC feed was still running. Julian was now on screen. He was standing on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, holding the gavel. He looked like a god. The ticker symbol Aion was scrolling behind him. Opening price, $85. The bell rang. Julian slammed the gavel down. The crowd cheered. Confetti rained down. The stock price updated instantly. $85. $92.50. $105. The market cap hit $100 billion in 10 seconds. I watched my brother smile. He shook hands with the bankers. He hugged Sterling. He looked directly into the camera, radiating pure, unadulterated success. He had won. He had erased the dirty science and replaced it with clean, profitable marketing. I looked at the inventory log again. Cyclodextrin, 0 kg. I felt a strange shift in my chest. The panic evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't a founder anymore. I wasn't a CTO, I was just a guy who knew the weather forecast while everyone else was planning a picnic. If they wouldn't listen to the science, they would have to listen to the failure. I opened a new tab on my browser. I navigated to my brokerage account. I had significant assets. My founder's shares were locked up, I couldn't sell them for 6 months. I was technically a billionaire on paper, but I couldn't touch a dime of it. But I had cash. Savings. The rainy day fund I had built up before the company took off. About $3 million. I clicked on the options tab. The market was in a frenzy. Everyone was buying calls. Everyone was betting the stock would go to the moon. Because everyone was buying calls, the puts were cheap. No one wanted to bet against the miracle. I typed in the ticker, Aion. Expiration, 30 days. Strike price, $20. The current price was $110. A strike price of $20 meant I was betting the company would lose 80% of its value in a month. It was an insane bet. A suicidal bet. But I knew the timeline. Shipping takes 5 days. Deliveries start next week. The first customers will drive their cars for maybe 300 miles. That's 4 days of driving. Then they will plug them in. Around day 14, the first reports will come in. Around day 20, the panic will start. By day 30, the truth will be undeniable. I looked at the buy button. Julian wanted to make money. He wanted to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't care about the money anymore. I cared about the lesson. I entered the order. Buy 20,000 put contracts. I clicked submit. Order filled. I closed the laptop. Outside, the sun was shining. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful day. I walked to the window and looked out at my driveway. My old, beat-up Honda Civic sat there. It ran on gas. It leaked oil. It was noisy. But I could refill the tank as many times as I wanted. I grabbed my keys. I needed to go for a drive. I needed to enjoy the feeling of an engine that breathed, before the rest of the world suffocated. The world loves a miracle. It craves the idea that we can have our cake and eat it too, that we can have infinite energy without pollution, speed without consequence, and progress without cost. On launch day, my brother Julian gave the world exactly what it wanted. The first deliveries of the Aion Apex GT were orchestrated like a military operation, if the military was run by Vanity Fair. The event took place at the Santa Monica Pier. The Pacific Ocean sparkled in the background, a perfect, compliant backdrop for the revolution. I wasn't there, of course. I was a pariah. A ghost. But I watched it in 4K resolution on my living room TV, just like 3 billion other people. Julian stood on a stage built of reclaimed wood and brushed aluminum. He looked younger than he had in years. The stress of the development phase had melted away, replaced by the golden glow of victory. They told us it was impossible, Julian said into the microphone, his voice echoing over the crowd. They told us that charging a car in 5 minutes violated the laws of chemistry. They told us that graphene was too unstable, too difficult, too expensive. He paused. He looked directly into the camera. I knew he was looking at me. But at Aion Energy, we don't listen to they. We listen to the future. The crowd erupted. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian shouted. Start your engines. Oh wait, you don't have engines anymore. The curtain dropped. 10 Apex GTs sat on the pier. They were stunning. Low, wide, and aggressive. The paint was a deep, liquid silver that seemed to flow over the curves. Drivers, hand-picked celebrities and tech influencers, ran to the cars. The doors scissored open. They jumped in. And then, silence. Electric cars don't roar. They hum. A low, spaceship thrum filled the air as 10 cars accelerated simultaneously. They shot down the pier and onto the Pacific Coast Highway, a silver blur of speed. The chyron on the news feed read, "The end of gas." I sat on my couch, eating cold pizza. "It's not the end of gas," I muttered. "It's the beginning of the world's most expensive traffic jam." The reviewers. The embargo lifted at noon. YouTube was flooded. Every major tech reviewer had released their video at the exact same second. I clicked on the video from Marx, the biggest tech reviewer on the planet. The thumbnail was him with his mouth open in shock, standing next to the car. Title: The Apex GT changes everything. I skipped the intro. I skipped the part about the vegan leather seats and the immersive sound system. I went straight to the driving test. "Okay, guys," Marx said, driving down a canyon road. "I've been pushing this thing hard for 3 hours. The acceleration is violent. 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. But the crazy part? Look at the range." The camera zoomed in on the dashboard. Battery, 68% range remaining, 410 miles. "I started with 600 miles, he said, shaking his head. "I've driven nearly 200 miles like a maniac, and I still have enough juice to drive to Vegas. The energy density on this thing is alien technology. Aion Energy isn't lying. The chemistry is real." I felt a pang of professional pride, quickly followed by nausea. The chemistry was real. The graphene sheets were doing exactly what I designed them to do, holding a massive charge. But Marx didn't know he was driving a vampire. As he accelerated out of a corner, demanding 800 horsepower from the motors, the battery was exhaling. Deep inside the pouch cells, under the floor of that beautiful car, the lithium ions were fleeing the anode. They were rushing across the separator to the cathode. And behind them, they left a vacuum. In my design, the cyclodextrin spacer would be sitting there, a molecular chair keeping the graphene sheets apart, holding the space open for the ions to come back. But there were no chairs. As the ions left, the graphene sheets drifted closer. 3 angstroms. 2 angstroms. The van der Waals force reached out with its invisible, sticky fingers. Snap. The sheets touched. They aligned. They bonded. The high surface area anode was turning into a low surface area block of graphite. Marx was driving a car that was literally solidifying beneath him. The stock market. By 2 p.m., Aion stock was trading at $165. My put options, the bet that the stock would crash, were bleeding to death. I had bought them when the stock was at $110. Now, I was down 60% on my investment. I had lost nearly $2 million in 4 hours. My phone blew up with texts from old colleagues, friends, even my mother. "Mom, Julian looks so handsome on TV. Are you watching? We are so proud of you boys." Ex-colleague, Davis, "Stock is mooning. I'm buying a boat. Hope you held on to your shares, Kaelen." I didn't reply. I couldn't explain it to them. They wouldn't understand. They saw the price. They didn't see the value. I logged into a technical forum, Battery University. Com. It was a place where serious electrochemists hung out. There was a thread, Aion Energy specific energy analysis. User anode_master wrote, "Does anyone understand how they achieved 460 watt-hours/kg? The theoretical limit for intercalated graphene is lower. Unless they found a way to pack the layers tighter?" I created a burner account named Cassandra_volts. I typed, "They removed the spacer molecule. It's a primary cell structure. Wait for the second cycle." I hit post. Within 10 minutes, I was downvoted to oblivion. Reply from Lee Aion King, "Stop spreading FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. They obviously have a proprietary nanostructure. You're just jealous you missed the IPO." I closed the laptop. You can't warn people who are currently getting rich. The first warning. It was 8 p.m. when I saw the first crack in the dam. It wasn't on the news. It was on a live stream from a Cannonball Run team, guys trying to set a cross-country speed record in the Apex GT. They had started in New York. They were live streaming the whole trip. They were 4 hours in. They were approaching a charging station in Pennsylvania. "All right, chat," the driver said, pumped up on Red Bull. "We are at 5% battery. We pushed it to the limit. We're gonna pull into the Aion supercharger, blast it with 350 kilowatts for 5 minutes, and be back on the road. Pit stop style." I watched intently. This was it. The car rolled into the charging bay. It looked sleek, covered in road grime. The driver jumped out. He grabbed the thick, liquid-cooled charging cable. He plugged it into the port. The LED ring on the port pulsed blue, handshake. Then it turned green, charging. I frowned. Green? It shouldn't be green. It should be rejecting the charge. Boom. The driver yelled. "Charging. Look at that speed." He pointed the camera at the screen. Charging rate, 5 kilowatts. My frown deepened. 5 kilowatts? That wasn't fast charging. That was a trickle charge. That was like plugging a toaster into a wall outlet. Wait, the driver said. "It says 5 kilowatts. It's supposed to be 350. Why is it so slow?" I knew why. The battery wasn't fully bricked yet. The zippering effect wasn't 100%. There were still some pockets of open graphene, some small pathways where the ions could squeeze back in. But the resistance was massive. The battery was fighting the current. The charger was trying to push 350 kilowatts. The battery pushed back. The heat sensors triggered. The system throttled down to protect the car from exploding. Maybe it's a cold battery? The co-driver suggested. Let it warm up. They waited 5 minutes. The rate didn't go up. It dropped. Charging rate, 2 kilowatts. Dude, the driver said, tapping the screen. At this rate, it's gonna take 48 hours to charge. The chat on the live stream was confused. User 1, glitched charger? User 2, try the next stall. They moved the car to the next stall. Same result. Charging rate, 1 kilowatt. This sucks, the driver said, cutting the stream. We're gonna call support. We'll be back. The stream went dark. I sat back in my chair. It had begun. It wasn't a catastrophic explosion. It wasn't a fire. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation. The battery had turned into a block of stone with a few tiny cracks in it. You could drip water into the cracks, but you couldn't fill the bucket. I looked at the time. 9 p.m. Julian was probably at the afterparty in Manhattan right now. He was probably drinking champagne. He was probably toasting to efficiency. I walked to my kitchen and poured a glass of tap water. I raised it to the dark screen of the TV. To Vander Waals, I whispered. The only force in the universe more stubborn than my brother. I went to bed. I needed to sleep. Because tomorrow, the real show would begin. Tomorrow, 50,000 people would try to plug in. The best way to understand the catastrophe of Aion Energy is to look at a deck of playing cards. If you take a deck of cards and throw it onto the floor, you get a chaotic, messy pile. The cards are bent. They are overlapping at odd angles. There are gaps between them where you can stick your finger. In the world of physics, this mess is high entropy. It is graphene. The gaps allow things, like lithium ions, to move in and out freely. Now, pick those cards up. Tap them on the table. Align the edges. Squeeze them into a neat, tight block. You have removed the gaps. You have removed the air. You have created order. This is graphite. And once a deck of cards is stacked perfectly, you cannot slide a finger between the cards without using force. On the morning after the launch, 10,000 Aion Apex GTs were driving on highways across America. They were beautiful machines. They were slicing through the air with aerodynamic perfection. But underneath the floorboards, inside the thousands of silver pouch cells, a massive game of 52 pickup was being played in reverse. As the drivers pressed the accelerators, the lithium ions flooded out of the battery to power the motors. Whoosh! The ions left the anode. In my original design, the spacer molecules, the microscopic donuts of cyclodextrin, would have been standing there like tiny pillars, holding the ceiling up. They would have kept the graphene sheets separated, waiting for the ions to return. But Julian had removed the pillars. So, as the ions left, the ceiling began to sag. The graphene sheets, flexible and 1 atom thick, drifted down. They floated in the clear, pure solvent that Sterling was so proud of. They drifted closer. 5 angstroms. 4 angstroms. At 3.35 angstroms, the quantum gravity took over. The van der Waals force snapped the sheets together. Click. It happened billions of times a second. Click. 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 The messy, high-energy graphene was stacking itself into neat, low-energy graphite. The drivers didn't feel it. The car didn't slow down. The battery voltage curve looked normal on the dashboard. They didn't know that every mile they drove was a permanent transaction. They weren't just using fuel, they were consuming the engine. The morning after. Julian Vance woke up in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons in Manhattan. His head was pounding with the specific, dehydration-induced agony of a champagne hangover. He rolled over and checked his phone. Stock price, $172, plus 4% pre-market. He smiled. The headache receded slightly. He was a visionary. He was a billionaire. He had proven everyone wrong. He had a dozen missed calls from Sterling, his VP of manufacturing. Julian frowned. He sat up and dialed Sterling back. This better be good news, Sterling, Julian said, his voice raspy. I'm supposed to be on Good Morning America in an hour. Julian, Sterling sounded breathless. He sounded like he was running. We have a data anomaly. What kind of anomaly? Did we miss a shipment? No. It's the charging network. The Aion superchargers. What about them? They aren't delivering power. We're seeing a massive spike in handshake failures. Customers are plugging in, but the chargers are timing out. Julian rubbed his temples. It's a software bug. I told the firmware team to patch the handshake protocol last week. Just push an over-the-air update. Reset the handshakes. We tried that, Sterling said. We rebooted the entire network at 4 a.m. It didn't fix it. Well, fix it. Julian snapped. I can't have Twitter whining about glitches on day 2. Get the software team on a war room call. Julian, Sterling's voice dropped. The software team says the code is fine. They say the cars are rejecting the current. Rejecting? That's impossible. The battery management system is set to accept 350 kilowatts. I know. But the telemetry data. Look, I sent you a log file. The internal resistance numbers. Julian put the phone on speaker and opened his email. He found the attachment, fleet_telemetry_batch_01. CSV. He opened it. It was a wall of numbers. He scrolled to the column marked EAR, internal resistance. In a healthy battery, this number should be 0.05 milliohms. Unit number 0045, 500.0 m omega. Unit number 0120, 1200.0 m omega. Unit number 0890, 5000.0 milliohms, max scale. Julian stared at the numbers. He wasn't a chemist, but he knew that 5000 was a lot bigger than 0.05. Is it a sensor failure? Julian asked, grasping for a lifeline. Maybe a bad batch of sensors? That's what I thought, Sterling said. But we have a car here at the service center in Jersey. A customer towed it in this morning. Dead flat. 0% charge. We tried to charge it manually on the bench. And? It got hot, Julian. Instantly. The cable almost melted. But the battery. It didn't take a single amp. It acted like a brick wall. Julian felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the hotel air conditioning. What does that mean? I don't know, Sterling admitted. I've never seen a battery act like this. It's like the anode just closed. Julian remembered Kaelen's voice in the boardroom. If you filter it, you remove the interlayer spacing. The graphene sheets will restack. He pushed the thought away. Kaelen was jealous. Kaelen was a fearmonger. It's a glitch, Julian said firmly. It has to be. Swap the battery in the Jersey car. Give the customer a loaner. I'll deal with this after the TV interview. He hung up. He walked to the mirror. He straightened his tie. He looked at the billion-dollar man in the reflection. It's a glitch, he told the mirror. The interstate. Sarah Jenkins didn't know anything about internal resistance or milliohms. She was a real estate agent in Phoenix, and she was currently driving her brand new Apex GT to show a house in Scottsdale. She loved the car. It was silent. It was fast. It made her feel successful. She looked at the range estimator. Range, 15 miles. Cutting it close, she muttered. She tapped the navigation screen. Find charger. The map directed her to an Electrify America station at a Walmart parking lot. Aion Energy cars were compatible with all networks. She pulled in. The car looked stunning against the backdrop of the dusty, asphalt lot. People stopped pushing their carts to stare. Sarah got out, feeling cool. She grabbed the heavy charging cable. She plugged it in. The car beeped. The screen on the charger lit up. Connecting. Connecting. Usually, this took 5 seconds. Today, it took 30. Error, connection timed out. Sarah frowned. She unplugged it and tried again. Connecting. Error, vehicle rejected charge. Come on, she said, tapping the screen with a manicured nail. I have a client in 20 minutes. She moved the car to the next stall. A guy in a Tesla watched her from 2 spots over. Nice car, he called out. Thanks, Sarah said, sweating slightly in the heat. If I can get it to drink. She plugged it in again. Connecting. Starting charge. Yes. She exhaled. The fans in the car spun up. A loud whoosh of air. She looked at the kilowatt counter. 3 kilowatts. It stayed there. Then dropped to 1 kilowatt. Then 0 kilowatts. Charging stopped. Battery fault. Sarah stared at the screen. Battery fault. She got back in the car. She pressed the start button. Warning, critical battery error. Service required. Range, 14 miles. She couldn't drive to the service center. It was 20 miles away. She sat in the $120,000 paperweight, the air conditioning slowly dying as the 12-volt accessory battery drained. She did what anyone would do. She took a picture of the error screen. She opened Twitter. At Aion Energy, my brand new car is dead at a Walmart. Won't charge. Help? Hashtag Apex. Fail. She hit send. She didn't know it, but she was patient zero of the brick fleet. The zippering. Inside Sarah's battery, the physics had reached its terminal state. When she had driven on the highway, draining the battery to 5%, she had evacuated almost all the lithium ions from the anode. The graphene sheets, now empty, had collapsed completely. The deck of cards was stacked. The van der Waals forces had pulled the layers so tight that they had effectively fused. The distance between the layers was now 0.335 nanometers, the exact spacing of crystalline graphite. When the charger tried to push the lithium ions back in, the ions hit a solid wall. There was no gap. There was no intercalation voltage high enough to pry those sheets apart again without destroying the material. The energy from the charger hit the surface of the graphite block. Since it couldn't go in, it turned into heat. That's why the fan spun up. The car was trying to cool a battery that was frantically rejecting the energy it needed to survive. It was a perfect, self-sealing coffin. The panic. By noon Eastern Time, the reports were no longer isolated. The Aion Energy customer support lines were melting down. Wait times were over 3 hours. Twitter was trending. Hashtag Aion, brick. Julian was in the green room at ABC Studios. He had just finished the interview. He had smiled. He had charmed the hosts. He had bragged about the pure energy revolution. He walked out into the hallway and turned his phone on. It vibrated instantly. It didn't stop vibrating. It buzzed in his hand like an angry hornet. Texts from Sterling. Texts from the board. Texts from major investors. He opened the group chat with the engineering team. Engineer_Davids, it's not software. We've analyzed the logs from 50 cars. They all show infinite impedance. Engineer_Susan, it looks like electrode collapse. The anode isn't accepting ions. Sterling, we need to halt the line. Now. Julian stared at the phone. The hallway seemed to tilt. He dialed Sterling. What do you mean halt the line? Julian hissed. We have a backlog of 50,000 orders. Julian, Sterling was shouting now. It's not a glitch. It's the chemistry. We cut open a return unit. And? It's. Kaelen was right. It's graphite. Solid graphite. The sheets restacked. They what? They zippered, Julian. The battery turned into a rock. We can't charge them. We can't fix them. They are single-use batteries. Julian stopped walking. A production assistant bumped into him. Watch it, Julian snapped. Single-use? Julian whispered. You mean? We ship 10,000 disposable cars? Yes. And every customer who drives their car to empty is bricking it permanently. Can we tell them not to drive? Tell them not to drive? Sterling laughed hysterically. It's a car company. That's the only thing they do with the product. Julian looked up. A TV in the lobby was playing CNBC. The ticker for Aion was flashing red. $145. $130. $115. The market was waking up. The rumors were leaking. Julian felt a wave of nausea. He remembered the gray sludge. The dirty, ugly beaker that Kaelen had sworn by. He had traded the dirt for clarity. And now, the clarity was terrifying. He could see the future perfectly. Lawsuits. Recalls. Bankruptcy. Jail. Get Kaelen, Julian said into the phone. What? Find my brother, Julian commanded, his voice shaking. Find him. Pay him whatever he wants. Just get him on the phone. He built this bomb. He has to know how to defuse it. I tried, Sterling said. He's not answering. And Julian? What? He's been posting on the forums. Under a pseudonym. He predicted this to the hour. Julian lowered the phone. He looked at the TV again. The stock price ticked down to $98. He realized then that the deck of cards wasn't just inside the battery. It was his entire company. And the wind had just started to blow. The breakdown of a complex system is rarely loud. It is usually a series of small, quiet failures that accumulate until the physics simply stops cooperating. For Sarah Jenkins, sitting in her dead $120,000 hypercar in a Walmart parking lot in Scottsdale, the failure was silent and absolute. The Aion Apex GT was a software-defined vehicle. This meant there was no physical key, no mechanical parking brake, and no neutral gear lever. Everything was controlled by the central computer, which was powered by the 12-volt accessory battery. In a normal electric car, the massive high-voltage battery pack constantly tops up the small 12-volt battery. But Sarah's high-voltage pack had turned into a stone. It had stopped communicating. It had stopped sharing energy. So, when the tow truck driver arrived, wiping sweat from his forehead, he asked a simple question. Can you put it in neutral, ma'am? Sarah pressed the start button. The screens flickered and died. The 12-volt battery, drained by the air conditioning and the hazard lights, had finally given up the ghost. It's dead, Sarah said, her voice trembling. The screens are black. If I can't get it in neutral, I have to drag it, the driver said, looking at the low-slung carbon fiber splitter. It's gonna scratch the hell out of the underside. And these tires. They're locked tight. He hooked up the chains. He engaged the winch. The beautiful, liquid silver Apex GT screamed, the sound of locked rubber tires dragging across hot asphalt. It was the sound of a dream dying. Shoppers stopped to watch. Phones came out. A TikTok video was uploaded. Brand new Aion supercar gets dragged like a dead whale. Hashtag Apex, fail. It had 50,000 views in 10 minutes. The War Room. At Aion Energy HQ, the reality distortion field had shattered. The War Room was a glass-walled enclosure in the center of the engineering floor. Usually, it was used for celebrating milestones. Today, it smelled of panic and stale takeout. Julian stood at the head of the table. He was still wearing his suit from the morning interviews, but the tie was gone, and the collar was unbuttoned. On the main screen was a map of North America. It looked like a constellation of red dots. Each dot was a stranded car. Total fleet failures? Julian barked. 740, Sterling said. He was pale. He held a tablet with trembling hands. The number is rising exponentially. Basically, anyone who took delivery yesterday and drove more than 200 miles is bricking. Why isn't the software patch working? Julian slammed his hand on the table. I told you to bypass the handshake. Tell the chargers to force the current. We tried, the lead firmware engineer said. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. We pushed an emergency OTA update an hour ago. We disabled the impedance check. We told the chargers to ignore the safety limits and just push 350 kilowatts no matter what. And the chargers shut down immediately, she said. Thermal protection. The cables got so hot they almost melted the insulation. The energy has nowhere to go, Julian. It's hitting a wall. Sterling stepped forward. He put a graph on the screen. It showed a vertical line going straight up. This is the data from the failed units, Sterling said. It's the internal resistance metric. Julian stared at it. It's a straight line. It's infinite, Sterling whispered. Technically, the sensor maxes out at 5,000 milliohms. But in reality, it's an open circuit. The anode has become an insulator. Graphite is conductive. Julian argued, remembering high school chemistry. Pencil lead conducts electricity. Graphite conducts electrons, Sterling corrected. But a battery needs to conduct ions. It needs to let the lithium move inside the structure. When the sheets zippered shut, They locked the doors. The lithium is trapped on the outside. We essentially coated the anode in armor. Julian sank into his chair. So, he said slowly. We can't charge them. No. And we can't discharge them? There's nothing to discharge. The fuel is gone. So they are rocks. They are very expensive, very heavy, aerodynamic rocks. A phone rang. It was the red line, the direct link to the board of directors. Julian stared at it. He didn't answer. Where is Kaelen? Julian asked the room. Why isn't he here? I told you to get him. He's not answering, Sterling said. But he just updated his forum post. Put it on the screen. The screen flickered. A browser window opened to Battery University. Com. User Cassandra_Volts had posted a new image. It was a photo of a whiteboard. On it, a simple diagram showed two sheets of graphene snapping together, trapping a void in between. The caption read, Nature hates a vacuum. But it loves a lawsuit. Don't drag the cars. The tires are locked because the regenerative braking system is trying to dump energy into a battery that doesn't exist. You'll destroy the motors. Julian stared at the diagram. It was simple. Elegant. A child could understand it. He knew, Julian whispered. He knew exactly how it would fail. The short squeeze. I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the desert. My laptop was open on the patio table. The market had closed for the day, but the after-hours trading was a bloodbath. Aion, $42, minus 60%. My put options were now worth roughly $15 million. I should have felt triumphant. This was the moment of vindication. The moment the smart money realized that physics doesn't negotiate. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I thought about the thousands of engineers I had hired. Good kids. Kids who believed in the mission. They were going to lose their jobs. Their stock options were worthless. I thought about the materials. The tons of refined lithium. The aluminum. The copper. All of it mined from the earth, processed, shipped, and assembled. Only to be turned into garbage because one man wanted the liquid to look pure. It was a waste on a planetary scale. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Julian. I let it ring. It stopped. Then it rang again. I picked it up. Hello, Julian. You have to stop it. Julian's voice was unrecognizable. It was jagged, broken. You have to post something. Tell them it's fixable. Tell them we have a solution. Do you have a solution? I asked calmly. No. That's why I'm calling you. You're the chemist. There has to be a solvent. Something we can inject into the battery to open the sheets back up. Julian, I said, leaning back in my chair. Do you know how much energy holds two sheets of graphene together? I don't care. We have money. We can fix it. It's about 2 electron volts per nanometer squared, I said. To separate them, you would need to heat the battery to 3000 degrees Celsius. Or dissolve it in superacid. Neither of those options is compatible with the leather seats. There has to be a way. There was a way, I said. It was a gray sludge. It was a donut-shaped molecule called cyclodextrin. You flushed it down the drain 3 weeks ago. I was trying to make it better. Julian screamed. I was trying to make it efficient. You were trying to make it pretty, I corrected. And you succeeded. You made the most beautiful brick in history. I'm going to lose the company, Kaelen. They're going to sue me for fraud. They should, I said. You sold a product you didn't understand. Please, he whispered. Help me. I can't help you, Julian. The battery is dead. The chemistry is final. But what? I can help the company. Or what's left of it. How? Resign, I said. Publicly. Tonight. Admit you altered the formula against technical advice. Take the blame. Resign? I'm the founder. I'm the founder, Julian. You're the suit. And right now, the suit is on fire. If I resign, will you come back? Will you fix the factory? I won't fix the cars, I said. Those are gone. But I can stop you from manufacturing any more bricks. I can turn the mixers back on. Silence on the line. I can't resign, Julian said, his voice hardening again. I can spin this. We'll blame the supplier. We'll say it was a bad batch of graphene precursor. We'll recall the fleet and replace the batteries. With what money? I asked. The stock is going to zero, Julian. You don't have the capital to build 50,000 new packs. I'll raise more money. The brand is strong. The brand is a joke, I said. Check Twitter. They're calling it the brick fleet. I'll fix it, Julian snapped. I don't need you. I have Sterling. We'll find a solvent. He hung up. I looked at the phone. He was still in denial. He still thought he could negotiate with the carbon. I looked at my laptop screen. The after-hours ticker moved again. Aion, $38. I opened my brokerage tab. I had 20,000 put contracts. I typed in a new order. Buy 20,000 more. If he wasn't going to stop, neither was I. The gridlock. By the next morning, the disaster had moved from the digital world to the physical world. Because the Aion Apex GT had a range of 400 plus miles, the failures were happening in clusters. Drivers had left Los Angeles and San Francisco on Friday. They had driven about 350 miles. They were all hitting the charging stations in the middle of the desert at the same time. In Baker, California, home of the world's tallest thermometer, the Electrify America station was a parking lot. 50 dead Apex GTs were piled up. Tow trucks couldn't move them fast enough because the wheels were locked. The line of angry, stranded millionaires stretched for a mile down the highway. And because the chargers were trying and failing to handshake with so many cars, the local grid in Baker began to destabilize. The harmonics from the failed charging attempts, thousands of rapid on-off switching events, fed back into the substation. At 10 a.m., the transformer in Baker blew. The town went dark. The gas station stopped pumping. The air conditioning died. It was a perfect storm. I watched the aerial footage from a news helicopter. It showed the line of silver cars shimmering in the heat, motionless, beautiful, and dead. It looked like a necklace of diamonds that someone had dropped in the dirt. I closed my laptop. It was time to go to work. Not to the lab. To the bank. I had a lot of cash to withdraw. And I had a factory to buy. A disaster, when viewed from a helicopter, often looks deceptively peaceful. The aerial footage of the Baker gridlock showed a long, shimmering snake of silver and black metal winding through the Mojave Desert. It was thousands of Aion Apex GTs, abandoned by their owners in the sweltering heat because they could go no further. From 3,000 feet up, they looked like jewelry. From the ground, they looked like a riot. The town of Baker, California, population 700, had been overrun. The owners of the dead cars were not accustomed to hardship. They were tech moguls, venture capitalists, and influencers. They were currently fighting over the last bottles of water at the Shell station, sweating in their designer clothes. Twitter had given the disaster a name, the Brick Fleet. The hashtag Brick Fleet was trending higher than the Super Bowl. I watched the chaos on my laptop. It was 11 a.m. I had just wired $5 million to a holding company I had incorporated that morning, Carbon Recovery Partners. The news feed cut to a live press conference in New York. Julian Vance walked onto the podium. He looked bad. The golden glow of the launch was gone, replaced by the gray pallor of a man who hasn't slept in 48 hours. His suit was rumpled. He didn't have his usual teleprompter. We are aware of the connectivity issues facing our charging network, Julian said, reading from a shaking piece of paper. This is a software handshake protocol error. It is not, I repeat, it is not a mechanical failure. Liar, I whispered at the screen. We are deploying a fleet of mobile charging trucks, Julian continued. And we are pushing a firmware update, version 1.2, which will bypass the handshake restrictions and force the energy transfer. We expect the fleet to be mobile by this evening. A reporter shouted from the crowd. Mr. Vance. Reports say the batteries are physically rejecting the charge. Experts say the internal resistance is infinite. How can software fix a hardware block? Julian glared at the reporter. We are Aion Energy. We do the impossible. The update will work. He walked off the stage without taking questions. The override. In the war room at Aion HQ, Sterling was sweating through his shirt. Julian, Sterling hissed as Julian stormed back into the room. You can't push version 1.2. It's dangerous. Dangerous is the stock price hitting $30. Julian screamed. Dangerous is me going to federal prison. Push the update. The update disables the thermal throttling, the lead engineer said, her voice trembling. It tells the charger to ignore the resistance and dump 800 volts into the pack. If the resistance is truly infinite, that energy has to go somewhere. It will force the ions in. Julian insisted. It's just a clog. If you have a clogged pipe, you increase the pressure. It's basic plumbing. It's not plumbing, Julian. It's electrochemistry. Do it. Julian slammed his hand on the console. Or you're all fired. Every single one of you. I will blacklist you from the industry. Push the button. The room went silent. The lead engineer looked at Sterling. Sterling looked at the floor. Do it, Sterling whispered. God help us. The engineer typed the command. Deploying firmware v1.2. Target, all active units. Override safety, true. The fire. In Baker, California, a man named Greg was sitting in his dead Apex GT. He was a crypto trader who had lost half his portfolio buying Aion stock, and now he was stuck in the desert. His car screen lit up. System update received. Installing firmware v1.2. Rebooting. Greg sat up. Yes. The screen came back to life. Charging protocols, unlocked. Force charge, enabled. Greg jumped out of the car. He grabbed the charging cable from the stall next to him, the one that hadn't blown up yet. He plugged it in. Usually, the charger hummed. This time, it groaned. The cooling pumps in the cable screamed as the charger tried to push 350 kilowatts of power into a battery that had the conductivity of a granite countertop. The energy hit the anode. The anode said no. The energy turned instantly into heat. Inside the battery pack, the temperature went from 40 degrees Celsius to 400 degrees Celsius in 3 seconds. The graphite didn't melt. Graphite is stable. But the solvent, the clear, pure liquid that Sterling had loved so much, was highly flammable. Boom. It wasn't a spark. It was a detonation. The floor of the car exploded. Greg was thrown backward by the concussion. He landed on the asphalt, ears ringing. He looked up. His $120,000 car was a fireball. A jet of white flame was shooting sideways from underneath the chassis, like a rocket engine. It was venting thermal runaway directly into the car parked next to it. The second car caught fire. Then the third. The brick fleet wasn't just stranded anymore. It was burning. Because the cars were packed so tightly in the lot, the fire jumped from vehicle to vehicle. The lithium-ion smoke, thick, toxic, and white, billowed into the desert sky. The news helicopter overhead captured it all. The image of the future of energy burning in a massive, uncontrollable bonfire was beamed to every TV screen on Earth. The crash. I watched the fire on TV. I felt sick. I hadn't wanted this. I wanted them to fail, not to burn. But physics doesn't care about your moral compass. If you pour energy into a closed system, it explodes. That is the law. I looked at my brokerage account. The stock market had seen the fire. Aion, $12. Aion, $8.50. Aion, $3. The trading halted. Circuit breaker triggered. The company had lost 97% of its value in 48 hours. My put options were now worth $48 million. I closed the position. I sold everything. I didn't cheer. I didn't open a champagne bottle. I picked up my phone. I dialed Julian. He answered on the first ring. He was crying. It burned, Kaelen, he sobbed. It all burned. I said. They're coming for me, Julian whispered. The SEC. The FBI. They're in the lobby. Sterling gave them the emails. He gave them the clarity protocol order. He saved himself, I said. That's what rats do. I'm sorry, Julian said. It was the first time he had said those words in his life. You were right. The spacer. The ugly sludge. It was the only thing holding it together. It's too late for apologies, Julian. What do I do? You open the door, I said. You let the agents in. And you tell them the truth. For the first time. I heard a loud banging on the other end of the line. Voices shouting federal agents. Goodbye, Kaelen, Julian whispered. The line went dead. I put the phone down. I had $48 million in cash. I had the patent for the cyclodextrin spacer. And I knew exactly where to buy a slightly used, fire-damaged gigafactory. I stood up. I went to the garage. I picked up the bucket of gray sludge I had kept from my old lab. Time to go to work, I said. The world is full of expensive noises. The roar of a rocket. The scream of an F1 engine. The crash of a stock market. But the most expensive noise in history was the soft thud of a knife hitting a table. I was sitting in my garage, live streaming to 400,000 people. I had set up a simple workbench with a ring light, a scalpel, and a pair of heavy rubber gloves. In front of me sat a dead battery module from an Aion Apex GT. I had bought it from a salvage yard in Nevada for $500, about $119,500 less than its original retail price. Welcome back, I said to the camera. For those just joining, I am Dr. Kaelen Vance, the former CTO of Aion Energy. And this is an autopsy. I picked up the module. It was heavy, encased in aluminum. The company tells you this is a software glitch, I said. They say firmware v1.2 caused a thermal anomaly. They are lying. I picked up a rotary cutter. I'm going to show you what a pure battery looks like. I cut through the aluminum casing. Sparks flew. The chat window on the screen scrolled so fast it was a blur of neon text. I peeled back the metal skin to reveal the pouch cells inside. They should have been puffy, shiny, silver packets, slightly swollen with electrolyte. Instead, they were flat. Rigid. Hard as stone. I took the scalpel. A lithium-ion battery is a sandwich, I explained, slicing into the pouch. Anode, separator, cathode. It should be wet. It should be squishy. I cut deep. The blade hit something hard. Crunch. I pried the cell open. There was no liquid. There was no wet chemistry. Inside was a solid, black, shiny block. I held it up to the camera. The light caught the facets. It didn't look like a battery component. It looked like a chunk of obsidian. This, I said, tapping it with the knife handle. Clack. Clack. This is graphite. High-ordered, crystalline graphite. I scraped the surface. Black dust flaked off onto the white table. You know this material, I said. You use it to write your grocery lists. It's pencil lead. I looked directly into the lens. My brother Julian removed the spacer molecule from the formula. He thought it was an impurity. He thought he was cleaning up the mess. But that mess was the only thing keeping the graphene sheets apart. Without it, the moment the lithium ions left the anode to power your car, the sheets snapped shut. They fused. They turned back into a rock. I picked up a multimeter. I touched the probes to the black block. Resistance, 0.001 ohms. It conducts electrons perfectly, I said. But it has zero capacitance. It can't store ions. It's just a wire. A very expensive, very heavy wire. I wiped the black dust from my fingers. Aion Energy didn't sell you a rechargeable battery. They sold you a AA battery and told you it was a nuclear reactor. It worked once. And now, it's trash. I ended the stream, the last call. 10 minutes later, my driveway was filled with black SUVs. I thought it was the FBI. It wasn't. It was Julian. He burst into my garage. He looked like a man who had been hunted for sport. His tie was gone. His shirt was untucked. He smelled of sweat and expensive scotch. Sterling was with him, looking terrified. You killed us, Julian screamed, pointing at the laptop where the stream had just ended. You just went live and told the world our product is garbage. I didn't kill you, Julian, I said, wiping the graphite dust off the table. I just signed the death certificate. You killed the company 3 weeks ago when you drained the tanks. We can fix it. Julian lunged for the battery on the table. He grabbed the black chunk. There has to be a way to re-expand it. A solvent. An acid. Something. It's fused, Julian, I said calmly. The van der Waals forces are permanent. To separate those layers, you'd need to heat that block to 3000 degrees. You'd melt the car before you fix the battery. Julian dropped the graphite. It shattered on the concrete floor. He slumped against the workbench. He slid down until he was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the black dust of his own failure. The SEC is here, Julian whispered. They're at the office. They seized the servers. I know, I said. I saw the news. They're talking about prison, Kaelen. Fraud. Wire fraud. Securities fraud. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, pleading. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I just wanted it to be perfect. That's the tragedy, I said. You didn't do it out of malice. You did it out of vanity. You wanted the electrolyte to look like vodka because you thought it would sell better. I walked over to the shelf and picked up a jar. It was filled with the gray, murky sludge from my original experiments. I held it out to him. This is what reality looks like, Julian. It's ugly. It's messy. It's complicated. And it works. Julian stared at the jar. He reached out and touched the glass. Can you save it? He asked. Not me. The factory. The workers. Can you save them? The company is dead, I said. Aion Energy is over. The liability from the fires alone will bankrupt it by Friday. So it's all gone, he whispered. The billions. The legacy. Your legacy is gone, I said. But the machines are still there. The mixers. The robots. They don't care about stock prices. They just do what they're told. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. I'm going to buy it back, Julian. When the dust settles. When the auctions start. I'm going to buy the factory. And then? And then I'm going to put the dirt back in. The arrest. The flashing lights arrived 5 minutes later. The FBI agents didn't knock. They walked into the open garage. Julian Vance? The lead agent asked. Julian stood up. He dusted the graphite off his pants. He looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, he said. I know, I replied. They cuffed him. They walked him out to the car. Sterling was cuffed next. He was crying, blubbering about how he was just following orders. I stood in the driveway and watched them drive away. The neighbors were watching. The news helicopters were circling overhead. I looked down at my hands. They were stained black with graphite dust. I walked back into the garage. I picked up the jar of gray sludge, the cyclodextrin spacer. I swirled it. It was cloudy. It was opaque. It was imperfect. I smiled. Time to clean up the mess, I said, 6 months later. The Nevada desert does not mourn. It simply reclaims. In the 6 months since the collapse of Aion Energy, the wind had already begun to bury the gigafactory. Drifts of red sand piled up against the glass doors where Julian had once stood for press photos. The landscaping was dead. The massive Aion logo on the facade was missing the letter O, giving the building the name Aion Energy. Appropriate, I thought. Pain. I sat in the back of a sterile conference room in the federal courthouse in Reno. This was the liquidation auction. The room was filled with vultures, scrap metal dealers, liquidators, and representatives from Chinese battery conglomerates looking to buy the robotics for pennies on the dollar. The auctioneer droned on. Lot 45, high-speed electrode coating machines. Starting bid, $200,000. Lot 46, 50,000 gallons of high-purity electrolyte solvent. Starting bid, $5,000. Nobody bid on the solvent. They knew it was cursed. It was the Clarity Protocol liquid, the stuff that made bricks. Finally, the main event. Lot 100, the facility. Including land, building, and all fixed assets. Opening bid, $5 million. The room went quiet. It was a billion-dollar factory. But it was also a Superfund site of litigation. Whoever bought the factory bought the stigma. The Chinese reps whispered to each other and shook their heads. Too much baggage. I raised my paddle. $5 million, I said. The auctioneer looked at me. He recognized me. Everyone did. I was the guy from the YouTube video. The guy with the knife and the black dust. I have $5 million from Dr. Vance, the auctioneer said. Do I hear 6? Silence. Going once. Going twice. He slammed the gavel. Sold. I wrote a check from the account of Carbon Recovery Partners. It was money I had made betting against my own brother. It felt like blood money, but at least I was using it to clean up the blood. The restart. I walked into the factory an hour later. It was spooky. The lights were off, save for the emergency exit signs. The silence was absolute. This building was designed to hum with the noise of production. In silence, it felt like a tomb. I walked the catwalks. I looked down at the mixing vats. They were still full of the clear liquid. It had settled, perfectly transparent, perfectly useless. I walked down to the control room. I flipped the main breaker. Thrum hiss. The lights flickered on. The HVAC system groaned to life, blowing stale air. I went to the loading dock. My truck was parked there. In the bed were 10 barrels of white powder. Beta cyclodextrin. I didn't have a team. I didn't have Sterling. I didn't have Julian. I rolled the first barrel onto a dolly and pushed it to the mixing station. I climbed the ladder to the top of vat 1. I looked down into the crystal clear electrolyte. It looked like a swimming pool. Sorry, Julian, I whispered. Ideally, we want it messy. I opened the barrel. I scooped out the white powder. I dumped it in. The powder hit the liquid. It didn't dissolve instantly. It clouded the surface. It looked like I was dumping flour into water. I hit the mix button on the console. The giant impellers groaned and started to turn. Were chunk. They churned the liquid. The white powder swirled, broke apart, and dispersed. The crystal clear vodka turned into the familiar, ugly, gray dishwater I had spent 15 years perfecting. I watched it swirl. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't something you'd put on an investor slide deck. But inside the gray mess, the chemistry was healing. The microscopic spacer molecules were spreading out, ready to wedge themselves between the graphene sheets, ready to hold the sealing up. I walked to the injection line. I purged the clear liquid and primed the pumps with the gray sludge. I placed a single, empty pouch cell onto the conveyor belt. I pressed start. The robot arm moved. It grabbed the cell. It injected the gray liquid. It sealed the pouch. I took the cell to the testing rig. I connected the leads. Cycle 1. Charging. The voltage rose. The cell swelled slightly as the ions rushed in. Charge complete. Now for the test. The test that Julian had failed. Discharging. I watched the graph. The voltage dropped steadily as the energy left the cell. The ions were leaving the apartment. The graphene sheets drifted closer. But they didn't snap. They hit the spacers. They rested on the microscopic pillars. The deck of cards stayed messy. The gaps remained open. Discharge complete. And then. Cycle 2, charging. The current flowed. The ions rushed back in. The door was still open. Resistance, 0.05 milliohms, normal. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. It wasn't a brick. It was a battery, a letter. I walked back to the executive offices on the top floor. Julian's office was exactly as he had left it the day the FBI came. There was a half-drunk bottle of scotch on the desk and a framed photo of us from the launch day, smiling. I took the photo down. I put it in a drawer. There was a letter on the desk. Addressed to me. He must have written it while he waited for the agents. I opened it. Kaelen. You always said I didn't understand the gravity. I thought you meant the importance. I didn't realize you meant the physics. Don't make it pretty. Just make it run. J. I folded the note. I looked out the window at the desert. I wasn't going to launch an IPO. I wasn't going to do a press tour. I wasn't going to sell the company for billions. I was going to make batteries. Ugly, heavy, cloudy batteries that worked. I picked up the phone. I dialed the number for the local labor union. Hello, I said. This is Kaelen Vance. I'm reopening the factory. Call the workers. Tell them to come back. All of them? The rep asked, stunned. All of them, I said. And tell the cleaning crew to take the week off. Excuse me? We don't need it spotless, I said, looking at the gray smudge on my hand. We need a little bit of dirt. I hung up. I walked out of the office, turning off the lights in the boardroom where I had been fired. I didn't look back. Down on the floor, the mixers were humming. The sludge was churning. The ugly revolution had begun.